Hi, chickies. You like my Frederick Douglass hairstyle? You like? It's nice. Well, looking back at Frederick Douglass and looking at the past financial crises, the depressions that this great United States, these states have had, historically, I can see that democratic capitalism um, does reach periods of depression, and people figure out how to deal with depressions, and then they bounce back. The thing about depressions is people want to avoid depression. People don't just want to be able to come out of depression. Of course, it's like saying that people want to avoid conflict, um, and therefore should just avoid conflict and never accept, for example, when they see a conflict in front of them, they swim in denial instead of finding a resolution. So check this. I'm listening to this NYU professor, econ professor, talking about how this system always bounces back. It always works. And Hugo Chavez is really going to screw things up because he thinks that our current depression indicates that democratic capitalism doesn't work. And he proves that it works because look, we've always bounced back. Look what's been done. Look what's been done. All of that is true. But check this. All of that has always depended on an underclass. Democratic capitalism has always depended on um, being insane, being hypocritical, perpetuating the myth of elitism while having a categorically, systematically disenfranchised underclass. And it continually leads to hedonism. I would say that um, the course of recovering is because we are human. But the path of destruction is animalistic. And so to sit here and tell people in 2009, with Barack Obama in office, that democratic capitalism is the bomb, that's irresponsible. That is ignorant. That's to not look at historical facts. That's to say that the British Empire, they had this huge empire that they built. And that was that was well, not at that time they had a kingdom, but even through parliament, this expansionism, this conquering, it depended on there being land, people, resources to exploit. It depends on what people call cheap labor. And what's the difference between cheap labor? You know what cheap means. Cheap is different from someone who's low income, who has the means to support themselves, even however low their income. That's different from being exploited and you're dependent. That's different. And democratic capitalism breeds this kind of dependence. No, again, I'm not just saying this because my ancestors were bought and sold on the slave block. That was democratic capitalism too. I'm not just saying it just because of that. But why aren't you saying it? Because your ancestors bought and sold even people. I mean, that's what I hear. That you believe in this system so greatly that you can even buy and sell people, and you will still sit here and tell us in 2009 that it works. So in 1899, when Frederick Douglass was around, he was saying the same thing. Ain't that peculiar? Ain't that interesting that Frederick Douglass was saying the same thing that long ago, at the turn of the last century? That the NAACP is still relevant? Democratic capitalism means rule of the majority. That's a tyranny. That is not I was going to say compromise. It's not a dialogue. That's not mutual respect. That is assimilationist. And government is supposed to represent the people. And the assumption, I guess, is the good of the people, not just the majority of the people. And the majority rule does not work. Consensus does. And to see consensus as the antithesis of democracy is false. It's false. There is democracy. in consensus building. There is democracy in governments acting on behalf of the people to protect the people, to act as the arbiter of, of public goods, water, air. I mean, look at the UK when they privatized all that stuff. And you're asking people to do it all over the world. And he's bragging about, well, I know it wasn't the brightest thing when I was, an IMF or, a World Bank consultant flying around the world, staying in, 5, 7-star hotels and going out and telling people in developing countries how they should privatize everything. So what? So a motherfucker can't have water? Motherfucker, the Indian government knows that these people that live on the other side of the walls in these shanty towns are tapping power from us. Everybody knows it. But you know what? In the face of them not being able to do it, they're also not going to enforce that. It's a kind of, it's less hypocritical than the American system, I would say, because they don't make big pretense about, that kind of stuff. But in America, to say that democratic capitalism is by definition, it's based upon meritocracy. It's based upon the cream of the crop rising as cream naturally does, implying that just as, we are all here, we're just like churning milk. Democratic capitalism is a way of churning milk, and the cream rises to the top, whoever the cream is. But that's not it, baby. That's not how they do what they do. Why? Because it's been white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal. That's why. Because it is always dependent on somebody being oppressed. Gender, race, caste, class, it depends on that. That's why. You can't add a moral argument. You should add a moral argument. You should ask moral questions, not just religious questions. Please, not how George W. Bush has co-opted y'all's religion. No. These have to be human rights-based questions. And if you are able to speak about human rights through religion, that's great. There are very few Christians who do. I dare you. I challenge Christians to speak about human rights from a Christian perspective. And start with human rights. Period. Not what Jesus said and the Bible wrote. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. If you can start with how can we get along, that's the starting point. That you have this firm belief that we can get along across difference. And to sit here, it just boils my blood. Because NPR, especially, this is why I don't listen to the white programs too much, but I guess if I hadn't been listening to it, I wouldn't have heard this bull. People really buy it. People really buy it.